What will be the effects of Kamala Harris's anti-price gouging law and Donald Trump's militarization of the border? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine those two issues. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that y'all know brings you the principled, uncompromising case for liberty and the libertarian philosophy. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again for another Libertarian Angle.
It's good to be with you and our viewers and listeners.
All right, so Richard, we're in the midst, of course, the presidential race, all the politics going on, and of course, this is the time when presidential candidates are out there offering political candies to the voters, hoping to garner their votes. And we see this especially in terms of the latest proposal to, no income tax on tips, trying to get the votes of people in Nevada that rely largely on tips. Both candidates, Trump and Harris, are offering that. But now Harris has come out with a proposal to impose price controls, or what she calls an anti-price gouging law, especially on grocery stores, but not limited to grocery stores, all across the board. And then you've got Trump over here that is proposing to militarize the border as part of his immigration control plan, but also with respect to the drug war, which of course means militarizing much of American society. So I figured, why don't we discuss these kind of proposals in terms of the libertarian principles? Clearly, they're antithetical to the principles of a free society. But let's talk about Harris first, her proposal to impose price controls. There's people, both conservatives and libertarians, that are saying, oh, what an ignorant woman. She doesn't understand that it's the Federal Reserve that is responsible for these price increases across society, what's called price inflation. And oh, if only she understood economics, she wouldn't be making this proposal. I look at it entirely differently. I think it's demonstrating her political brilliance. This is a smart move on her part. And I have no doubts that she understands that the Federal Reserve is responsible for monetary debasement. But she's smart. She understands that this is a way to get votes, because most people do not understand that the Federal Reserve is behind these surreptitious, fraudulent increases in prices. When the Federal Reserve prints ever increasing sums of printed money, that lowers the value of everybody's money. And there's only one way that value can be reflected, that lower value, and that's through price increases of everything that money buys. If your money is buying less, then that's reflected in higher prices. So if you have $100 that is now buying 20% less than it did a year ago, you've suffered a 20% essentially a tax. That your money's not going as far as it did before. But what politicians throughout the ages, ever since the printing press, have discovered is that most people don't realize that. They don't know that the government's behind this. They just see the rising prices. They go to the grocery store, they realize, my gosh, my money isn't going as far as it used to. And then it's easy to think, oh, well, the fault of this is the people raising the prices. So instead of seeing a diminution in the purchasing power of their money, they're seeing these rapacious, greedy, profit-seeking bourgeois swine of capitalist pigs that own the grocery stores, and also big oil. I'm surprised that Harris hasn't started concentrating on big oil, but you can rest assured that soon you'll be hearing about big oil and excess profits and the prices that gasoline station owners are charging us. And then that's where people's focus is. So it's like, wow, here's a politician that wants to help me by stopping these people from raising their prices, while the Federal Reserve continues to go on through its antics because people don't realize what's going on. So Harris is just honoring the time-honored tradition especially during campaign season, but even after that, of blaming and focusing attention on the scapegoats. To me, that's it's a fraudulent move, but it's a smart political move because she realizes that the average voter, the average taxpayer, the average person has absolutely no idea that this constant price rise across society is not due to a diminution in the value of their money. It's due because these people are just the store owners are just trying to gouge them with higher prices. What do you think?
I think that that's a time-tested method, but when you have a situation in which even the Washington Post, who's been salivating with excitement about her being the candidate and beating Trump, when they even have editorials saying this is dark age, misdirected economic thinking that will generate shortages and lacks of incentives for people to produce goods, I'm not sure if it's going to get away as easily as it sometimes had in the past. Uh, Virtually across the board, there have been strong criticisms of this. Now, of course, it's an example of Bastiat's what is seen and what is unseen. What is seen is the price you pay at the store. It goes up. It is difficult for the average individual to understand what are the causal links behind that price that they observe that has made it go up or down or stay the same. And of course, if all prices are generally rising in the same direction, though not all at the same time and to the same degree, um, there's only one factor that can be doing so, and that is an increase in the money supply. Normally, if the money supply is fixed, that is not increasing, and if the price of hamburger meat goes up, uh, there is no way you can continue to buy the same amount of hamburger meat than to reduce your spending in some other direction given its higher price. But the only way you can pay more for hamburger meat and keep paying the same amount of dollars for other goods, or even if they're rising as well, is if there's more dollars created. That's obviously the underlying cause of rises in prices is the inflation of the monetary supply. And Nixon did this in the 1970s, followed by Gerald Ford. There have been numerous instances of this tried in other places, both in America and other times. So yes, but I'm not persuaded that she can push it as far as you're suggesting, given that even the media that is sympathetic to her are questioning the validity and the veracity of this. So I don't think she's necessarily going to be able to run with it during the entire campaign and say, well, I'm going to freeze prices, I'm going to cap prices, I'm going to have anti-gouging. But you're right. In one sense, it's the historical method that politicians use to point their finger at anyone except themselves or those agencies under their control.
Well, you make a really interesting point because we sometimes lament we libertarians that we're not making any progress, and the fact that many people in the mainstream press are now challenging this notion
Yes,
of price controls, it really is a testament to the progress we've made over
yes.
the last 30 years in terms of education. People recognize that price controls are a disastrous way to deal with price inflation. They produce shortages. Why did we have those long lines in the 1970s during that period of time you were talking about, the Richard Nixon era? You had long lines because of price controls on gasoline. And it makes sense, Richard. You put price controls on somebody like a meat producer. He still has to pay exorbitant rising prices for the things that he uses to produce this meat. And all of a sudden he realizes, I can't make a profit here. I'm going to go out of business. So I'm not going to put myself out there and produce meat at a loss. And so then you have to extend the price controls to his factors of production. So it doesn't just stop with the gasoline station owner or whatever. You just start extending price controls throughout society. And now you have a totally government controlled, managed economy with massive shortages, because you're still going to have the shortages throughout that. And so people go to the grocery store and it's, oh, there's bare shelves on paper towels or Clorox or detergent or other things you need. Like, why are there shortages here? Well, duh. So I think it's a good sign that of what you're talking about, that maybe we're making some progress here, and that she may not get away with this after all.
But it does remain the fact that the extent that she makes this case and promises to implement it, and she can persuade segments of the voting population to accept it, this is a delusionary and dangerous policy. If you set the price below where the market would set it, you just end up in creating a situation in which suppliers have less incentive to replenish their supplies as they're sold off at the regulated price. Because, as you were saying, the retailer has to buy his restock supply from the wholesaler. And if his retail price is now set below what it costs him to buy from the wholesaler, he can't stock as much as before. And then you can extend the control to the wholesaler, but the wholesaler only has his product by buying it from others higher up the supply chain. And you have to extend the controls there. And then the suppliers of those people in the supply chain, until, as Ludwig von Mises argued, the famous Austrian economist, you end up with a system that if the price controller is determined not to admit the unworkability of a system and has to extend the controls up again and further up the supply chain and further up the supply chain in an incremental way, you end up with the comprehensive system of price and production controls over the entire economy, and therefore through the back door, you end up with a planned economy. Because then, if prices are not guiding production, and entrepreneurs do not have the incentives to produce what seems profitable because the price system isn't serving its purpose, then the government has to command and control and direct, and you're ending up with a planned economy on a piecemeal basis.
Yeah, well, and it's all part and parcel of the campaign season. I mean, we're libertarians understand that we don't live in a free society. We're really electing our dictator, our ruler, our controller, our master. But what I think the reason people get so giddy during campaign season is that it's the one time in the 4 years where the future master is being nice to us. They're trying to garner our votes. Hey, I'm gonna cap prices for you. Look what a good person I am. And then, of course, so everybody gets excited about that because the rulers, both candidates that are vying to be the rulers, are being very nice and offering things to us. But everybody knows that the day after the election, the hangover is there. Okay, oh, now we got 3 more years of this ruler where he doesn't have to be so nice after all until the next 3 years come along, 4 years. I mean, another example of this phenomenon is the tips, that both Harris and Trump are saying no tips on no taxes on tips. And of course, everybody on tips is saying, oh my gosh, which one am I going to vote for? They're being so nice and kind to me. They don't realize that they're just buying votes. That's all this is. And as soon as the election's over, everything switches again. But wait a minute, what happened to your promises? Hey, I'm elected. I don't need to worry about my promises at this point. Now, another factor that I mentioned at the beginning of the show, Richard, is the militarization of the border. I mean, it's really fascinating to see both of these candidates fighting to see who is going to be a fiercer proponent of immigration controls. I mean, this system is going on for 100 years now. I mean, it has brought death, suffering, a police state along the border, crisis, chaos, and yet they both are doubling down in that we're going to make this system work. Well, it'll never work. But and Harris, they accused Harris of being a failed border czar, and so she's ashamed of that moniker. So she's doubling down and saying, no, I'll be a fierce enforcer, and I'll be up there just right there with Trump. But Trump is of course calling for the militarization of the border. I think she favors that too. Biden certainly has sent troops down to the border. But Richard, is this the kind of society that we want to live in? A militarized society? And it inevitably, it won't be just for the people living along the borderlands, the militarization of the border, which has already been going on to a certain extent. But Trump's also talking about militarizing the drug war, bombing Mexico, going after the drug cartels with bombing attacks, and which of course is just waging war on a society. But I think it's important that we explain what that means, the militarization of society. This is not a pleasant society where the military's in charge and people have highway checkpoints to go through and show their papers, and where the military's down there shooting people, invaders coming into the United States. This is not the kind of free society that our founders envisioned, is it?
Well, I think it's the same problem that you were alluding to with the price control business, and that is what is seen and what is unseen. The fact is that many people, misguidedly, are afraid of the arrival of immigrants and immigrant groups. They think it undermines their labor employment opportunities. They think it threatens their culture and neighborhood environments. Uh, and that's all the things that seem to be seen. More people arriving who speak a different language, who have different customs, backgrounds, maybe religions, and and therefore they're undermining the stability and the structure of our society. What is unseen is the history of our country. The fact is that our country has, and I know it's a cliche, it's a melting pot of a nation of immigrants. And whether a large number came originally in the late 1800s and early 1900s, 1700s and 1800s from Europe, a wide diversity of different parts of people from Europe. And then people started coming from other parts of the world. And these are the mixes and the blendings together that, in fact, make what we take for granted. And normally, most people don't complain about America today. But we are a product of these waves of immigration for different reasons from different parts of the world, all of whom have added their background, their skills, their abilities, their cultural nuances, and to make what we take for granted. We are a very diverse and inclusive society, to use a catchy phrase, in ways that I do not use it as the woke people do, but we are. We're an inclusive and diverse society. We are a multitude of different types of people, of different cultures and backgrounds, languages, customs, and traditions, who all blended together. And then in this inclusiveness, a diversity. You like certain kind of food, you like to practice certain customs, you like to associate with different types of people, either of your own ancestral background or others. We're all free to do this in a free society. And with every mouth comes an additional pair of hands to do work. And in fact, the waves of immigrants have enabled us to have the level of standards of living and increased intensified productivity and innovation that has made us a great economic powerhouse looking over the last 200, 250 years. So again, it's an example of this, what is seen and what is unseen. You immediately see something that you think is alien or different or uncomfortable or seeming to be challenging something that you take for granted in the society, and you do not see what is unseen, that is the links in the chain a little bit further down the road, all of which ends up increasing the opportunities for the flourishing of your society.
Yeah, what I find really fascinating about this immigration debate is how so many proponents of this system continue to be wedded to it. I mean, look at it. It decade after decade for 100 years, all of our lives, we've had an immigration crisis in one form or another. And every 4 years, people go into these paroxysms of anxiety and political debate and the presidential race. What are you going to do about immigration? What are you going to do about immigration? And it's never changed except for the fact that they always double down with new controls. It used to be just in the beginning, just the border patrol. And when that didn't work, then they go into highway checkpoints and they go into the criminalization of hiring immigrants. That was supposed to solve all the problems. Make it illegal to hire illegal immigrants. That really worked, didn't it? And then transporting immigrants and harboring them and caring for them. If you just stop on the side of the road to help out an immigrant who's dying of thirst, they'll indict you on a felony and they'll convict you and send you to jail just for giving the person water or taking him to a hospital. And then they've got the Berlin Wall there. In other words, they keep doubling down on this system. And now since none of that has worked, that they cannot bring themselves to acknowledge that this is an inherently defective system. It'll never work, no matter what they do. And it be why? Because it's based on the socialist principle of central planning. We were talking earlier about what they do with price controls. They start centrally planning the economy, putting price controls here, there, and then on the wholesalers until they totally are managing in a central planning concept this economic system. That's what they've done with immigration. They centrally plan the free movements of people and allocate how many, what numbers, what the credentials are. It can't be done without what Ludwig von Mises, who you quoted earlier, called planned chaos. I mean, what better term to describe the situation on the border than planned chaos? And yet they will not let it go. These proponents of immigration control say, we don't care. We don't care if it's a police state. In fact, some of them seem to like the fact that it's a police state. There's all that government control there with the DEA and the Immigration Service and the Border Patrol, the highway checkpoints and so forth. And now the militarization. I mean, troops are taught to kill people, Richard. That's the whole thing about the military. You're supposed to be training to go to war to shoot and kill people. That's
I think what you have, what's part of this is that is not what is emphasized, though. What is emphasized is a thing like, well, what defines a country if you don't control the borders? Or what Trump loves to do, well, who are coming? Other countries are dumping their drug addicts, their criminals, their gangsters, their rapists, and that therefore what we're controlling are all of these socially undesirable types through regulated immigration to check who's coming in, who is trustworthy, hardworking, honest, not a criminal. And that if we don't do this, what does it mean to have a nation? Is it not a territory with a line? And doesn't this line supposed to represent something? Or if you do not have a line that isn't somehow demarcated and delimited and has a purpose to it, then there's no nation. You see, those are the arguments they use, not the militarization.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is that in order to achieve their goal, they have to militarize the border. They have to make it like North Korea's border, where no one can come in, because obviously their system has failed to keep people from coming in. We've got 11, 12 million estimated illegal immigrants here. And so in order to make their system work, they have to move toward North Korea's system, which their border is pretty effective in keeping people from moving out. Nobody wants to move into North Korea, but in keeping people from crossing the border, that's been pretty effective. That's what they're trying to accomplish here. Now, to address your point here, as you suggested, our system traditionally, historically, has been a system of freedom, diversity. People are free to cross borders. We have open domestic borders where people are free to go from state to state. They might be criminals, drug dealers, terrorists, murderers, serial killers, whoever. But we don't have border controls to keep that movement from taking place. It's the same thing with Mexico. You know, they've inculcated this notion in us that Mexico is just filled with rapists, thieves, robbers, and whatever. Yet there's like more than 1 million Americans living in Mexico voluntarily. They're living among all these thieves and murderers and rapists. It's ridiculous. If somebody wants to cross the border, absent this full militarization of the border, they can obviously come into this country. And yet it's been proven that immigrants have a lower crime rate than Americans do. Most people who are trying to get into the United States are coming to get rich. And they know that you don't get rich on welfare by stealing money from people, either politically or in the private sector. You get rich by working. And those are the people that are really infusing our society with vitality and energy. In fact, it's interesting that the welfare recipients, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, many of them lament immigrants. They're the ones shoring up this system with their hard work and payment of taxes.
Well, I think there's another thing to this that plays into both the political and the implicit racial dimension to this. And that is that the Democrats are not very interested in opening the immigration opportunity to Europeans. They're very open and crying, you know, their empathy for Latin Americans in particular, because they seem to have this racist theory that if you're not white, you are genetically programmed to vote Democrat. I mean, isn't that what Biden said when he was running 4 years ago? If you don't vote for me, you're not black. See, Democrats represent these minority groups. It's a genetically thing, natural. So their idea is to just bring in, open the border more to people from Latin America, because brown people are genetically programmed to vote Democrat, which is part of the reason why the Republicans oppose this. Because whether they realize or not, they accept the same framework. Oh, brown people will never vote Republican. They're both racists in this sense. The idea that people might vote for or against something because of how they perceive the desirability of the policy, the efficacy of what's being proposed, whether it gives you more freedom or less freedom, that no, people don't act on that basis. It's all genetically programmed. So we're either for you or against you based upon what you look like. So in that sense, both have a sort of like implicit racist view of the world, and therefore who you want in more and who you want in less. And that also plays into this, to the same thing, is that for the Republicans, particularly of the Trump types, everyone who is from Latin America is a drug addict, a criminal, a rapist, a murderer. But what about if we let in a bunch of Scandinavians? No rapists among them, no drug addicts among them. You get a nice, good-looking, guy from Sweden, no problem. But that one guy from Mexico, it's the end of the world. So they all operate on. In fact, Trump even said that. He said, why? He's in Europe on one of his trips when he was president. He said, well, why don't we have more people that look like Swedes coming into America? Look like it's. But you see, this mindset operates in both of them based upon what they think is going to be the link between how a person looks and how they're going to vote. And in that terms, they're willing to use any and all means to see that the sieve only allows the desirables in and not the undesirable for their political purposes. And just I can extend this point. This is what is shocking some Democrats, because they see these polls that, yes, Harris has had this bump, since Biden was kicked out. But the point is that the polls are showing that historically more Hispanics and more blacks were likely to vote for Trump than has traditionally been the vote for a Republican. And they can't understand this. We're shocked. How can our guaranteed ethnic groups not be supporting us? Are they having some DNA switch? I mean, what's wrong with them? So this is how they think. It's a very racist mindset on both sides.
Well, yeah, but as you're talking, I'm thinking there might be another factor here with both of them. Is if you take like Venezuela, they've had economic sanctions on Venezuela, which combined with the socialist system there has caused a massive exodus of immigrants,
Right.
and many of which are coming to the United States, which aggravates the immigration control system. But those that come in are very likely to question the whole socialism of America, both Democrats and Republicans, because that's what they're fleeing in Venezuela. The massive out of control spending with welfare, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the welfare state, the state taking care of people, the police state. So when they look at our massive welfare state system and they look at the police state, they very well might likely say, you know what? I think pox on both the Democrats and the Republicans. We ought to be going with libertarianism instead.
But just to elaborate on that point, there was a large inflow of people from Cuba at various times during the last half century or so. Now 60 years, I guess. And were all these Cubans murderers and rapists? No, they have become a part of the prosperous middle class of Florida and of course other parts of the country. But we think of it particularly in southern Florida. Hardworking, diligent, professional people, family oriented, about as American and apple pie as you can imagine. Why wouldn't we expect this to be the case from other waves of immigrants, like those escaping from socialism in Venezuela?
Okay, on that fine question, we'll wrap things up. As always, Richard, enjoyed the conversation. Thank you all for tuning in. Thanks for your support. We're doing a mid-year fundraising drive. Thank you, those of you that have helped us out. And if you could help us out with a donation, we'd be greatly appreciative. Thank you very much. And Richard, look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.